Alrighty, the contagion of fear. The contagion of fear. Um, excuse me. That title comes from an essay that Dr. Holmes has written in the book Living the Science of Mind. So if you want to read some more about this today or through the week, if you can find that book or have that book, look for the essay on contagion of fear. If not, look in the Science of Mind textbook for the chapter on faith, because the two are very much related. Dr. Holmes tells us that fear is the opposite of faith. Fear is faith in the wrong direction, if you want to put it that way. So as we approach this election, and I want to make it clear from the start, I am not endorsing any candidate. I'm not getting down into the politics of the situation. We are working at the spiritual level to kind of observe what is going on in the world, observe what is going on in our consciousness, and deciding how we as spiritual beings want to react. How do we want to be? How do we want to feel? And what is coming up for a lot of people in conversations with people, in emails and messages on the internet and those sorts of things, is this fear of worry, this fear of dread that is coming up. People are saying, I'm just so concerned. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just so worried about what's going to happen. You even see articles in the in the headlines about, the children are starting to catch the contagion of fear. And the children are going to school when they're concerned and they're worried, and they're expressing that to the teachers, And people are worried, if this candidate gets elected, they're going to do this, that, or the other thing, and it's going to be terrible. And then if that candidate gets elected, well, they're going to do this, that, or the other thing, and that's going to be terrible as well. And what are we going to do, And what is the stock market going to do? And what's going to happen with world peace? And it goes on and it goes on and it goes on, and we kind of get caught up in this great big ball of worry, we're stuck to it. It's like the tar ball that you get stuck to. You keep punching it and you get stuck to it. And we want to stop and take a breath, and we want to come back away from that for just a little while this morning. We want to come back away from that and say, wait a second, wait a minute. Do I need to be worried? Do I need to be caught up in these events? Where does my good come from? Where does my power come from? Where does my life come from? Dr. Holmes tells us when we are faced with a discordant thought, he would call them, we have to look it right in the eye and say, wait a second. Who are you? Where did you come from? Who's your mother? Who's your father? On whose authority are you here? And that helps us to break away a little bit, to break away from being caught up in the drama of the moment. Omniscience, all-knowing. Omnipotence, all-powerful. Omnipresence, everywhere presence. Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us if we really, really understood that, but not just at an intellectual level, if we really realized it, if we really felt it, then all of our problems would come to an end. We would have nothing to worry about. Dr. Holmes tells us that all fear comes down to one great fear. The one great fear is that God is not what we think God is. That everything that we've been taught about the divine may not be true. And if we could overcome that fear, then we would overcome all of our fears. Now, in the Eastern tradition, in meditation, I know many of you are familiar with the idea of mantras in meditation. Back in the 70s, transcendental meditation was very popular in the United States. Centers were growing in many cities, and people would come to work, and it was kind of like a crowning moment, I guess, in their development, that last night at their class, the teacher gave them their personal mantra. This was kind of a stage of development. So we're familiar with the idea of mantras in meditation, kind of like a droning chant that goes on in the back of our mind, and not only occupies our mind, but has deep spiritual significance in our lives. But there's another use to mantras that I want to mention, because I'm going to suggest to you that If we don't have one, try omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. Try that as a mantra as you meditate. Omniscience, right? And here's the other way that mantras are used. And we learned this from a lady who was a critical care nurse. And in the Eastern cultures, if your mind is kind of caught up, if you're caught up in pain, or you're caught up in fear, or you're caught up in all of these dramas of life, of course, meditation is a way to separate from that, right? To turn the mind inward, away from the externals, and to be still and know. And the Bible tells us, be still and know. Do you know God? Be still and know. How do you know God? Be still and know. Be still and know. But sometimes we can't do that. We can't get away from it. There's just so much going on. There's so many things happening. What do I do? And what they do in the Eastern tradition is, if you're so frustrated, if you're so caught up, if you're so involved in the drama of what's going on, concentrate on your mantra. And the critical care nurse would work with patients who were in a great deal of pain, and they couldn't get their mind away from the pain, and she would say to them, what's your mantra? What's your mantra? And they would tell her their mantra, and then she would sit there and she would chant with them. Right? Medically, she could do no more for them. They had given the patient all the care and all the medicine they could, but the pain was still overwhelming. But she could sit with them, and she could help them to bring their mind to their mantra. And then what happens is, once we can bring our mind away from the events that are going on, if we can get in touch with that one thing, and I'm suggesting omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, if we can get in touch with that one thing, then our mind starts to withdraw from the drama that is without. So right now what's happening is we are very much caught up into a very interesting time. Remember the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. We are in some interesting times, and things seem to be being whipped up to a point that we may never have seen before, or at least we don't remember seeing before. There's just this great amount of fear. Everybody's concerned. And what it reminded me of is the fable about Chicken Little. And if you're from Europe, it's Henny Penny in Europe, but here we call it Chicken Little. And most of us grew up with it. Now, fables, as mythology, they're not just fairy tales that we tell children. Well, we do. In our country, we tell children these fairy tales as bedtime stories. But they're teaching stories, yes? They have a value to them. There's some kind of a hidden message, if you will. But Little Red Robin Hood was clearly a message to young girls to be careful. Don't go off with strangers. So our fairy tales contain the nuggets of great wisdom, oral tradition that's been passed down for years and distilled in a manner that we can pass on from generation to generation in a little story that people remember. Vernon Howard wrote a book called Psychopictography, and he said that long after the words are forgotten of a talk, the images that are left in our minds stay with us. This is why the ancient teachers taught in parables. Jesus taught in parables because people could remember them. They were simple stories, So the story of Chicken Little is very simple. I actually had to go back and reread it because I remembered the first part. But Chicken Little's walking down the road, and an acorn falls off a tree, and it hits her in the head, and Chicken Little immediately decides the worst. The worst is happening, That which we have feared is upon us. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. And she runs off in a panic. She decides that she wants to go tell the lion. Apparently the lion was the one in charge, Now it's interesting to watch, in the story what it's telling us. Her first observation was not, well, what was that? Or look around and see what it was that fell on her head. To look for a reasonable or logical explanation. But the sky is falling. The sky is falling. And you have to wonder, why in the world would would she come to that conclusion that the sky is falling? It doesn't even make sense that the sky could fall. But nevertheless, there was something in Chicken Little. There was something in Chicken Little that was afraid the sky was falling. And she ran off in a huff, and she's looking for the lion, and she comes up upon the hen. And the hen says, my goodness, what's going on? You're all upset. Where are you going? And she says, the sky is falling. The sky is falling. And the hen says, well, how do you know that? She says, well, a piece of it fell on my head. That's how I know. And I've got to go tell the lion. I've got to go tell the lion. And the hen said, well, I need to go with you. And the two of them are running down the road, and the two of them are very excited, and they come upon the duck. And the duck says, what's going on? And now the hen, who only knows this secondhand, the hen tells the duck, well, the sky is falling. And the duck says to the hen, well, how do you know? And the hen says, well, I know because Chicken Little told me that a piece of it fell on her head, and we have to go tell the lion this is terrible. And they go running off to go tell the lion, but they don't know where the lion is. They don't know where to find the lion. Right? And I thought that was funny too, because there was a saying in the cavalry. It said, when in doubt, gallop. And in the infantry, we had a saying that said, don't just stand there, do something. As long as you look busy, you got to look busy. If you don't know what's going on and you're concerned, pretend that you're doing something. Yeah, that'll take care of it. So the three of them go running about trying to find the lion. They have no idea what a lion is, and they run upon the fox. Now, you have to get the image. A Chicken Little, a hen, and a duck go to the fox for help. Now, in what world would a chicken and a hen and a duck go to a fox? Never, right? Because the fox is their arch enemy. The fox is the one that's going to eat them. But the fox says, well, where are you going? You three seem pretty upset. And they say, well, the sky is falling. And he said, well, how do you know? And he said, well, it hit Chicken Little on the head, and we have to go tell the lion. And the fox says, do you know where the lion lives? And they said, well, no. And he says, well, I know. Come with me, and I'll show you. And of course, the fox doesn't take him to where the lion lives. The fox takes him to his den where he can devour them. Right? Great wisdom in this little story. There's great wisdom there, because when we are afraid, when our emotions are prevailing, when we are running around like Chicken Littles, thinking that the sky is falling, logic and reason escape us. Logic and reason completely escape us. We just want to make the fear go away, is basically what happens. We get so agitated by it, so annoyed by it, that we will do anything in order to get it to go away, even turning ourselves over to the fox, you see. And the moral of the story is several. Right? What were they afraid of? What did they know? They didn't know. It was a contagion of fear. Chicken Little on her own decided the sky was falling with no objective facts and data. The sky is falling. And the hen caught that fear from Chicken Little, and then the duck caught it from the two of them. But the fox knew what was going on. The fox knew that they weren't thinking. They were scared, and he could use that for his advantage, and he did. And I have to imagine there's a second part of the story that later on has the fox going back up the road, throwing acorns on the head of little chickens in order to induce fear into their lives, in order to get them to come running back to him and asking him for protection. So I think, in writing the story, they're kind of telling us, everybody who tells you to be worried, everybody who tells you to be afraid, don't listen to them, because they may not have a good reason. They may not even know what they're talking about. And there may be people who are trying to use you, who are trying to instill fear in you for a reason. And you can see this if you look at our history and you look at our culture of humanity. There are people at all times who the way that they achieve power is by instilling fear in people. Well, put me in charge and I will protect you from the enemy, even if the enemy is an invisible enemy that we have never seen. We've seen religions rise on this fear for thousands of years. If you don't believe the way that we teach, why, you're going to suffer for an eternity. So you need to come to us, and you need to do what we tell you to do, and you need to give us your money, and you need to be obedient, because we know more than you do. And you can see it, of course, in politics. And I know I've mentioned this movie before, The Jayhawkers, but if you can find a copy of The Jayhawkers, it's a Western with Fess Parker and Jeff Chandler. It was a perfect example of it because one night the bad guys would run into town and they would shoot up the town. And the way you knew they were bad guys was they were wearing masks and they had red leggings on over their pants. And then the next night, Jeff Chandler would ride into town with his band of men, and he'd say, I'm chasing a band of bad men who wear red leggings over their pants. And I understand they were here, and I'm sorry that I didn't get here in time, but I'm going to hunt them down, but in order to do so, I need resources. So if you will, just go clean out your bank accounts, give me your money, clean out your storehouses, give us some food. I'll leave some men behind here to protect you, and and I will go chase them. Oh, and after I catch them, I want you to elect me your leader. And of course, people had nothing to lose, so they pledged their allegiance to him. And then, later on in the movie, you find that there's only one band of men. They ride into town one night with their red leggings on. They ride in the next day without the red leggings on, try to save people from the evil that they created themselves. So there's no shortage of people who will try to use fear to manipulate us. And we have to be aware then that much of the fear that is being whooped up at this time is being deliberately whooped up. It is being deliberately whooped up because people get what they want. If they want something from you and you're afraid, they're more than likely to get it. And you see that, don't vote for this one, be afraid of what happens if they get elected. Don't vote for the other one, be afraid of what happens. And we're being kind of led into the events of the day based on fear, strictly on fear, which is not a good place to be. If we look at, and right now I'm talking about from the human psychology point of view, I'm going to get to the spiritual part of it in a minute. If we look at the news media and what they're doing, they rely on fear, because fear keeps us glued to the TV set. What's going to happen now? Every night the news comes on, and they burst in with a worrisome tone, and they tell us the breaking news. You ever wonder what would happen if there was no breaking news that day? The comedian Benny Hill used to quip, and he used to say, "Isn't it amazing that every day there's just enough news to fill the newspaper?" This is contrived. It's edited. It's being put to us, and they want things to look different than they are because it keeps us tuned in. So if they can keep us afraid and keep us worried, and we have to tune in every day to find out what we need to be worried about today. Years ago I used to refer to one of the popular anchors of the day as the national worrier. That was his job. He would get on TV every night and tell us what we had to worry about today. So the news media is, in many respects, gaining from the fact that people are worried. And rather than do anything to alleviate our fears, it's in their best interest to keep us worried. So that we will continue to tune in. So my point here is this game of keeping people worried to take advantage of them is at least as old as the Brothers Grimm. It's thousands of years old. We can go back into world religions. It's been around a long, long time. And if we understand what's happening intellectually, if we understand it, it becomes easier for us to detach from it. Instead of getting caught up in saying, "Oh, ain't it awful," which is what they want, right? The news is the "Oh, ain't it awfuls." Oh, ain't it awful? We can take a deep breath and we can step back and say, "Wait a second. This is contrived. This is being put on in order to arouse my emotion, in order to keep me engaged." You ever wonder why they play music behind the news? Music goes behind the drama. Now we're getting music behind the news. Now we're getting annoying drum beats, boom, 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 in the background behind the news. If you listen to it, it's there. So first thing is the contagion of fear. Fear is contagious. Fear is like a flu bug, Ernest Holmes tells us. We could someday pick up the paper and we could read that an epidemic of fear is breaking out in such and such a part of the country. And then maybe later we would read, "Oh, there's been an antidote. We found an antidote to fear. And it's now being administered in that part of the country, and the epidemic of fear is going away." We can walk into a room and we can be perfectly happy, and if people in the room are upset, we can pick up on that. We start to feel uncomfortable ourselves, and we don't even know why. They don't even have to say anything, right? We're all connected. The waves are connected through the ocean. We are all connected through race consciousness. And we can pick up on what's going on. They say animals can feel our fear. Children can sense when we are upset or afraid. And we can we can sense that in other people. We just know that there's something wrong. There's something's going on. And if we don't understand that what's happening is we are picking up on the vibes, if you want to call them that, of other people, we start to think that it's our own feeling, our own emotion. Remember the first time that I realized that what I was feeling was not my emotion, but it was actually emotion of someone sitting across the room from me in a workshop. It was a great relief, because now I don't have to take every emotion that comes along and own it. I don't have to take every emotion that comes along and think, well, I need to do something about that. So it's like meditation. In meditation, we learn to say, oh, look, there goes a thought. We can do the same thing with emotion, and we can say, oh, look, there goes an emotion. There's tension in the room. There's anger in the room. There's fear in the room. But I do not have to own that, you see. I do not have to say it's my fear, it's my anger, it's my anxiety. No, I can just acknowledge that it is there, but it is not mine, you see. I don't own it. And if I need help in breaking away from it, I can remind myself: omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. God is right here. God is right here where I am. So the reason fear persists is at our level of maturity in our society, the level of maturity of consciousness. You hear me talk about the 3 levels. The dominant emotion of the first level is fear. That's what it is. And people know it, and they know how to manipulate it, and they know how to work it. And there was a certain value to it. In the times of evolution, being afraid of tigers was probably a good thing. It probably helped the species to survive. And those people in the community who could warn us what to be afraid of, well, they were very valuable people. You know, these were the seers and the advisors to the kings and those kind of folks who would say, well, you know, don't take this course of action because this could go wrong, and don't take that course of action because that could go wrong. So at a time when if there wasn't enough food to go around, the king had to decide who was going to starve and who wasn't. The person who could worry a lot and be accurate was valuable, the counselor, and they were kept on. So there became this value in worrying, this value in trying to anticipate what was going on, what was going to go wrong. And that persists to this day. And if you're interested in pursuing that from a psychological point of view, I recommend a book by Richard Brody called The Virus of the Mind. And he starts to explain these things, you know, where you get these crazy emails telling you, you know, something terrible is going to happen or what to worry about. The one that comes to mind is one time I was working and a lady in the department forwarded an email to everybody, and it basically said, if you're traveling on the road, which we all did, we all traveled all the time. If you're traveling on the road, you have to be very careful because people have been going into the hotel bar and getting a drink and waking up in their bathtub packed in ice and their kidneys have been removed, you know. Urban legends. And of course I sent it back to her and I said, prove it. You know, give me one documented case. You know. And of course she couldn't. It was all rumor and innuendo. It was, you know, a noted newspaper once reported and all these kind of things. And finally in the article they had a telephone number at the end for more information. She called a number and she got somebody's voicemail and said, please, if you're calling me about that crazy email on the internet, I don't know who started it, I don't know why they put my phone number in it, but it's all junk. And the reason that people forward things like that around is they want to feel valuable. In our culture we have confused worry with caring. So if I care for you, I'm going to worry about you. That's the way our society thinks. And if I'm not worried about you, I don't care. That's the flip side of it. And that is not true. See, that is not true. Suppose I knew that you were okay. Suppose I knew that the love of God was with you. Suppose I knew that the power and the wisdom of God was with you. What should I worry about? Why should I worry about you? If you call me as your practitioner and ask me to do treatment with you, what I'm doing is I am knowing the omniscience, the omnipotence, and the omnipresence is with you, that perfection is with you. And I'm not going to worry about you. See? I'm not going to worry about you after that. I've done my treatment. I've set the law in motion. I know that there's a power that is higher than the psychology of fear, the psychology of doubt. So that's the human perspective. And now we want to take a step back and we want to say, but what about from the spiritual perspective? What does this mean to us? Why are we talking about this? And again, I'll flip to the Eastern culture for just a moment. And in Buddhism, they are told if someone upsets you, you should thank them because they have pointed out to you an area where you can grow. In other words, why did you get upset? Why did you get upset? Why are you afraid? Why did Chicken Little immediately come to the conclusion that the sky was falling? What about what is going on in society upsets you, and why? So your spiritual growth then comes from saying, wait a minute. All of those things that they're talking about from the human level, from the psychological level. They're talking about manipulation and power and control, and they're talking about all the things that human beings talk about. But can we take it up a notch to the spiritual level? You know? Thomas Troward called it the fifth kingdom. Can we start to think of ourselves as spiritual beings? In Jewish mysticism, they talk about the mineral, the vegetable, the animal, and the speaker as the evolution of the growth of human consciousness. Right? Not human. They bypass human because the human is no different than the animal. There's no different than the animal level of thinking. Right? We're not, in terms of we are not engaging our spirituality. We are just going by instinct and intellect. But there's a spiritual aspect to our being. And we have to ask ourselves, if I am upset, why am I upset? If I am afraid, why am I afraid? And where does that tell me that I can grow? How is that pointing out to me an opportunity for my spiritual growth? So a lot of it comes down to, who do you believe is responsible, and what do you believe is responsible for your well-being? Is it the politicians? Is it the investment bankers on Wall Street? Or is it your realization of the presence of God within? Dr. Holmes tells us that if we fear losing money, then our belief is in lack. Our faith is in lack, and it's not in the ever availability of the supply of God. We think, well, but that supply has to come to me through my job or through my investments or through this or through that. And no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It does if we believe it does. But those are not the only ways and means that the divine mind has. Right? This is the story of the manna from heaven. The good appeared when they needed it. And you can't save up today for tomorrow. You can't hold what you have. You have to be available in the moment to receive the good that God is trying to give to you. What power are you afraid of? Do you believe in divine protection? Do you believe in the presence of God? Do you believe in the all-powerful nature of the divine as an active presence in your life? Or do you believe, well, yeah, it's okay, God is all-powerful and God is all-knowing, but what about me? And this brings us to the crux. This brings us to the crux of the issue. Dr. Holmes said the root of all fear is a belief that God is not everything we said it was. See, we've been given the divine promises of protection in scriptures for years. The Lord shepherds me, I lack nothing. Do we believe that? Do we really believe that? The 91st Psalm. He who abides in the secret place of the Most High dwells in the shadow of the Almighty. The secret place of the Most High. Consciousness. Consciousness. Do I really believe that if I have God consciousness, if I realize the presence of the divine within, do I really believe that? That no harm shall come to me? 1,000 shall fall at thy side and 10,000 at thy right hand, but no harm shall come to thee. Do I really believe that? Do I really believe that? And the answer is no. If we did, we wouldn't be afraid. If we did, we wouldn't be caught up in the drama. We wouldn't be caught up in what's going on. We wouldn't be manipulated in the way that we are allowing ourselves to be manipulated. So we have to come back and we have to ask ourselves, what do I truly believe about omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence? What do I truly believe about God, and what do I truly believe about how that applies to me? Another way to think of this is, what have you put between yourself and God? What limits have you put on to that which is in itself unlimited? You know, we say, well, God is unlimited, and God is abundance, and God is our supply, and the invisible of the universe becomes visible and takes whatever form as may be appropriate at the time. We could say that. But then we put limits on it. We say, but it has to come to us only when the Dow Jones is going up. It has to come to us only if Social Security is fully funded. It has to come to us, and you can fill in the blanks of all of the other details. We say that God is divine protection, right? Because the divine is love. It is perfect love, and it is all power. It is all power, it is all knowledge. It has no enemies. We really have to get that one, right? Because our problems stem from duality. Not only do we believe that there is God in us, but we believe that there is good and there is evil. There is God and there is a devil. And we have to come to realize that God has no enemies. This idea of Prince of Light and Prince of Darkness came to us from Persia thousands of years ago. We have to get over that. God is. God is one. God is unity. God is good. The only reason that it appears that God is not active is because we have limited its activity in our consciousness. Goldsmith tells us this very plainly. You know, God is peace and God is everywhere present. Therefore, peace is everywhere present. Okay, we can intellectually follow that line of argument. He says, but then why isn't there peace? Why is there war? Because it's not enough to say that God is everywhere present. We have to realize. We have to realize through experience that God is everywhere present. So Dr. Holmes tells us then that fear is faith pointed in the wrong direction. That we are worrying and we are believing and we are seeing and we are feeling and we are envisioning something that we don't want to have happen. And we can just as easily turn that around and look out the other window, as the Quakers would tell us. Look out the other window at what is it that we would want to have happen. What is it that we believe to be true? And he goes on to tell us that faith is built up. Faith is built up from 3 steps: belief, acceptance, and trust. Belief, acceptance, and trust. So if you find yourself getting caught up in the events of the day, ask yourself, well, what do I believe? What do I believe? Right? You have to be willing to, Dr. Holmes said, you have to be willing to, first of all, admit that you're afraid. Right? You know, it's like whistling past the graveyard. You know, we wouldn't whistle if we weren't afraid. We have to admit that we're afraid. We have to be honest with ourselves. This is where our growth is going to come from. And then we have to say, well, what do I have to believe to be true in order for me to be afraid? And I think if you examine what's going on, we have given all of our power away to somebody else out there. Somebody who has in many cases deliberately tried to instill fear in us so that we would do just that. And what we have to do is we have to say, well, what do I believe? Do I believe that my good fortune depends upon this party or this candidate or that candidate? Do I really believe that? I must if I'm afraid. What do I want to believe? What do I want to believe? And what I want to believe is that God is good, and that God is all-knowing, and God is all-powerful, and God is right here. And without regard to what happens to everyone and everything else, my circumstances depend upon my consciousness. We are all swimming in this stew of race consciousness, right? We are all subject to all of these different ideas and all of these different emotions and all of these different things that are going on. And we want to remember first that what we must do is we must protect ourselves from this. Like the boy in the plastic bubble, the John Travolta movie of years ago, right? We want to surround ourselves. Sometimes people talk about surrounding ourselves with the white light and all things like that. But what we want to do is we want to, as Dr. Holmes tells us, we want to insulate, isolate, and inoculate ourselves from what's going on. And treatment, spiritual mind treatment, affirmative prayer, is a process by which we do that. So we start out, we have this belief. What do you believe? Well, if I'm afraid, I'm believing in something other than God. There's no fear in God. So if I'm afraid, I'm believing in something other than God. Okay, good. You acknowledge that. Now, what do you want to believe? What do you want to believe? Well, I want to believe that God is good. I want to believe that God is all powerful. I want to believe that God is acting in my life. I want to believe that there's a power in the universe that responds to me according to my belief. And if I change my beliefs, then my good depends only on the interaction of that law with my consciousness. And I am insulated, isolated, and inoculated from all of the drama of the world. All right, well, what can we do to build up that belief? What can we do to accept that? See? And it's practice. It's practice makes perfect. We have to not wait until we're in distress in order to say, the old saying, when all else fails, try God. Not wait until we're hopelessly caught up in the fear that we need somebody to be with us and hold our hand and say, omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. Where did that lie come from? Who's its father? Who's its mother? Do you know who you are? You are the beautiful expression of God. Do you know what you are? You are the love of God in action. So what we do is we practice. We practice on a daily basis. We practice using the tools in our spiritual toolbox to change our consciousness. See, essentially what we're talking about is the change that is required is a change in consciousness. We have the consciousness of fear. We have the consciousness of separation. We have the victim-victor consciousness. We have all of those things that go on in human life at level 1. And we want to get away from that, and we want to change that consciousness. Well, what changes consciousness? What is it that changes human consciousness? And Emmett Fox tells us the only thing that changes human consciousness is prayer, affirmative prayer. Joel Goldsmith puts it a different way. He says the only thing that changes human consciousness is our contact with the divine. And they are both saying the same thing, you see, because affirmative prayer is designed as a technique to allow us to make our contact with God. When we pray affirmatively, what is the first thing we do? We start by acknowledging God and what God is and what we know about God. And then the second thing we do is, what is our connection? What is our connection with that? We bring ourselves right into that realization, into the feeling of oneness, into the feeling of connectedness with the divine. So we practice every day. We practice every day for what it is that we would experience this day. More love, more peace, more joy, right, in this world. around us, in us, around us, and through us. And many times what happens is people say, well, what about everybody out there? I need to go save everybody out there. Because if I don't change those people out there, then what good is it going to do? And the answer is, you're not going to change all those people out there. You can't be responsible for that. They're going to change themselves. They're going to change themselves. But they need something in that stew other than the fear, other than the negativity, other than the doubt. A bright light. Someone who can walk in the room and be calm when everybody else is upset. Someone who can look and see the good in what's going on, you know. That's another thing we can practice. Can you see what's good in what's going on? Say, oh my God, it's crazy. How can there be any good in it? Well, everything that's going to change in human consciousness, everything that's going to change has to get shaken up, right? It's the chaos theory. And when something's been stable for a long time, it goes into chaos before it changes. We used to teach this saying that, you know, hot water freezes faster than cold, because the hot water is already in chaos. The molecules are already moving, and they want to return to a stable state. Well, if you look at human events, things get kind of crazy looking before they get better. And perhaps that's what's going on. Perhaps it's good, you see. So can we look and can we see the good? So belief. Do we believe there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief? Do we believe that God is good? Acceptance. Can I accept that God is working in my life now? And the way that I learn to that acceptance is by reminding myself of it through my reading, through my listening, through my contemplation, and my practice daily. Can you practice changing your mind? Can you practice changing your consciousness? That's what you're doing. You know, sometimes people say, well, I don't want to treat for something simple, you know. Sometimes you hear people when we first start out, they're treating for parking spaces, and other people say, oh, you shouldn't be treating for a parking space. Well, it doesn't matter. You're practicing changing your consciousness, you see. That's what you're practicing. Whatever you feel you need to change your consciousness about that day, take into treatment. Take into treatment and practice. Learning how to change your consciousness is the most important skill that you will develop in this lifetime. If you wish to experience the presence of God while you're still in the flesh, you have to change your consciousness, because the only thing preventing you from that experience is what's in your consciousness, you see. And this is why we are told, be still and know. Shut your mind down. Be still and know. Let the magnificent presence that is already there, let it do its thing. Let it shine forth. Let it come through. We can practice in our treatment by treating for our elected officials, by treating for our government. You and I are the owners of this country. It's perfectly okay for us to treat, for us to know that divine guidance is what is ruling this country. That divine guidance moves our leaders, no matter what the public opinion says, divine guidance is moving them in the right direction. Every 4th of July, we kind of take a look at the Declaration of Independence, and I'll just hit it quickly here. The Declaration of Independence, if you think of it, is a beautiful affirmative prayer. It starts off by acknowledging God, you know. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that God gave us these rights, but God gave not just us these rights, us, these men writing these words, gave all men the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that governments are instituted to preserve and to defend those rights, you see. And the men who wrote those words, they were committed to them. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors. And I think it was James Madison who said, or John Hancock, one of the two, who said, if we lose, I pray they grease the rope. And what he meant was he knew he would be hung. He knew he would be hung for revolting against the king. But they were committed to their change. They were committed to it, you see. And even though they couldn't live their words, even though they held slaves and other things that they did, you know, women couldn't vote, people without property couldn't vote, it was okay to hold slaves. They did many things that we look at now and say, my God, how can they possibly say that all men are created equal when they didn't live it? It didn't matter, you see, because they set in motion that change in consciousness that had to unfold. It had to unfold. And years later, it unfolded in the Civil War, and it took it bloodily. It took it another step because people wouldn't let go of the old consciousness, you see. But nevertheless, they set into motion a powerful change. And we can do that as well. If you want, you can go read the Declaration of Independence over and over again. Contemplate the words. But you can also treat to know that there is a power that runs the universe that is greater than anything that human beings have ever thought of. And it is omnipresence. It is with us here and now. And it is with our leaders here and now. And it is guiding and guarding and protecting each and every one of us. So what this comes down to is it's easy to get caught up in the drama. It's easy to get caught up in the fear. It's easy to get caught up in the, oh, ain't it awfuls. But we as spiritual beings need to separate ourselves from that. We need to insulate, isolate, and inoculate ourselves from that. We need to break away. And if you need a mantra, you can start with omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. And stay with that until you know that. And then you can take yourself into your spiritual mind treatment. What is it that I wish to experience now? I wish to experience the poise of God now. I wish to know that the country is divinely protected, but not just this country, all countries. I need to know that there's a power indwelling with all of humanity that is moving us forward for a greater expression of freedom and love for all. And I need to know that I shall not pay attention to appearances, but I shall judge with the righteous judgment. We want to stop thinking of ourselves as only human. We want to stop thinking of ourselves as victims of a system. And what we want to start do is recognizing that there needs to be hope. Right? There needs to be brightness. There needs to be optimism. There needs to be light. And we are the instruments through which God's light shines. Dr. Holmes tells us it makes no difference how long a room has been darkened. The instant we turn a light on, the darkness disappears because it was nothing pretending to be something. It makes no difference how confused things are right now. It makes no difference. It makes no difference what the manipulations behind the scenes are to bring these things into fruition now. If we turn the light of consciousness on, if we become that flu shot for fear, if we become the ones who have faith, and to multiply our faith through belief, through acceptance, and through trusting that God is here and trusting that God is acting, we can be the catalyst of change, but not by working at the human level and getting caught up in the fray, but by working at the spiritual level and letting the change take place within us. Within us. See, the love is already here. The peace is already here. The joy is already here. The confidence is already here. The poise is already here. If we're not feeling it, if we're not realizing it, if we're not experiencing it, the only place for us to go is within. We can't change anything out there that's going to get us to be more peaceful, more poised, and more confidence. If you had $1 million, you'd worry that you would lose it. If you had $1 million, you'd worry that you might need 2. If you had 2, you worry that you might need 10. It's not in the externals. The peace, the fulfillment is an internal job. So I invite you this week, as things unfold around us, as drama unfolds around us, as people around us express their concerns, be willing to reach out and take their hand. Be willing to tell them it's okay. It's okay. And you can say so because you know that God is good, and God is right here, and God is right now. And so it is. And I wanted to close this morning with a treatment that Dr. Holmes himself wrote. And it's, again, this is in Living the Science of Mind. I'm on page 363. And this is a treatment about fear. And we're going to close with that today. I lay all fear aside, and in confidence and complete faith, I turn to the one perfect divine presence, knowing that the light of truth shines upon my path, even as divine love guides me into the secret place of the Most High, where I dwell under the shadow of the Almighty. I know that there is nothing to be afraid of in God's world. Fear cannot operate in me, nor can it go forth from me. At the very center of my being, there is complete confidence, complete faith. At the very center of my being, there is a consciousness of protection of divine love, the guidance of divine wisdom, and the strength of divine power. And so I turn in thought to the whole world and know that my word is bringing light and life and a feeling of strength and confidence to everyone. I turn in thought to the leaders of the world everywhere and know that love and intelligent guidance is directing their thoughts and actions. I turn in thought to all the nations of the earth and awaken in them the realization that there is good enough to go around, that there is a divine government under which they all may be protected from the fear of each other. I turn in thought to the great creative imagination of the human race and assure it that there is a feeling and a presence at the center of everything waiting to make itself known. I turn to the great good who knows all, to the great God, and I turn to the great God who knows all things and who can do all things, and say, lead, kindly light, amid the encircling gloom, lead thou me on. And so it is. And I will leave that closing treatment in the video, the edited video on YouTube, if you want to go back in and listen to that and share it. We thank you all for being with us today. We thank you for being God's instrument of love. Please, this week, take a deep breath. Step back from the world of appearances. Don't get caught up in the drama. You're more than that, much more than that. No